When someone says, I don't have an ego, or I know someone else that does, or yeah, that guy's a real jerk, or that gal's a real jerk, that's all your ego. The ego is just the thing in us that blames, judges, accuses, gossips, pokes, prods other people. It's the thing that makes us have a reason of why we're not good enough and why someone else is holding us back, or why someone else isn't good enough and they're holding us back. And so it's recognizing which ego type are you. In the business that I run, there's three egos. There's the complier, the controller, and the protector. And we all have 1 to 2 dominant egos that show up in our world that we're more comfortable with.
Hello. Welcome to another knowledge bomb episode of Live to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. If this is your first time joining us, please consider subscribing and hit that notification bell and hit that like button. This will be greatly appreciated in helping getting out this content to great leaders and great individuals like yourself. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Christie Garcia. Christie is a leadership coach, speaker, facilitator, and founder of the digital Mindful Choice Leadership Academy. Christie increasingly grew frustrated watching talented individuals be promoted to management and fail to reach their leadership potential. Over the last 9 years, she has worked with business owners and leaders from fast-growing and modern organizations, including Airbnb, Twitter, and Sunrun. Christie builds programs that helps individuals and teams maximize their impact through self-awareness, ownership, communication, alignment, and accountability. Cedric and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
I am a leadership development coach. I've been in business for the last 10 years, and I help people manage their ego. It's kind of my niche. So it's a fun way to help people maximize their impact by really identifying their unconscious behaviors, stories, beliefs, all that fun stuff that really impacts business, leadership, how you're interacting with your teams, and transforming relationships both at work and home. It's pretty incredible stuff.
Here in your leadership journey, you talked about leadership development coach. I want to talk about that beginning stage when you first begin in what you do. What was it like? Did you have all the answers? Was every day sunshine? Let's talk about that.
Oh, if it was only. Well, as you know, I think one thing to become a good leadership coach, you have to really recognize that you never have all the answers. I think leadership is a journey. I definitely started my own back in my 20s, really started the emotional part of my journey, the ego part of my journey around 30. And I had a really life-changing, eye-opening experience that God just put it out there and said, here you go. You're getting one more chance. You get to decide how you want to use it. And so I was walking my dog one morning about 10 years ago. And I guess, gosh, it's been 11 years ago now. Crazy. And we were walking normal Friday morning before work. And I locked myself out of my apartment and went upstairs, knocked on my neighbor's door, asked her if she would watch my dog while I went down the fire escape and into my kitchen window, which we had done a million times because that's just what this building would do, would lock you out. And this day was raining. And so my neighbor said, well, I don't want to go upstairs to the roof and crawl down. Why don't we just go through my fire deck? So outside our both windows was like a big fire deck that we could walk across to get to mine. I'm like, okay, sure, why not? And so we walked out there, and all of a sudden I am falling 30 feet to the ground because I walked in the 2x2 manhole.
Oh, wow. And
so that was one of those days where everything changed. The crazy part, what I really learned around my journey that day, as I fell, I knocked myself out. Somehow I managed to not injure myself major. It was pretty crazy. I had 5 stitches and a couple tendon issues, but for the most part, I walked away from that experience. I was out of the hospital in 4 hours. But the crazy part is when I woke up, I had this manic energy, like move your toes, move your fingers, you're good, let's go on. I was actually having a holiday party that night. So all my friends were coming over. I'm like, I got stuff to do. We got no time for this. So the paramedics come, they want to take me to the hospital. I'm like, I'm good. I don't think so. And they're like, yeah, that's adrenaline. And so, they took me to the hospital. I'm kind of annoyed, but I get there and Turned out fine. So within 4 hours, I went home, and it was just kind of, I went about my day. I was annoyed that I had to cancel my party, and I was relieved I didn't have internal bleeding. That was the crazy brain that I had in that moment.
Wow.
For about 2 weeks, nothing really changed other than, hey, I had a fall, I'm fine, everything's good. It was Thanksgiving, went home to the family. About a week after that, so first week of December, I get home to my apartment, and I have a coach at this time. So I've already started kind of my coach journey and training. And my coach said, how are you? I tell her what happened. She's like, wait, what? You fell 30 feet. I'm like, yeah, it was kind of crazy, but I'm all good. Like everything, I'm back to work. Life is great. And she finally asked again, how are you? I said, I'm good. And so she stopped one more time and she said, Christie, how are you? And I literally started bawling. It was one of the most expensive cries of my life. I always say it was about a $5,000 cry because I just sat there for my whole hour and just cried. And I didn't know why I was crying. And it really scared me. But I realized that what was happening was that controller ego had taken over my life. And I was happy. I had friends. I had a great job. I lived in the city. I had this penthouse apartment. I was making great money. I was traveling the world. I was doing all these great things. So I thought it was good. And when I had to stop, I realized, wow, just because you're good doesn't mean you're happy. Just because you're good doesn't mean you're on the right path. Just because you're good doesn't mean you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. That was the year of change for me. I left the city, bought a house, started my business, and was ultimately ready to just help people make sure they weren't going to be me, that girl who was good, living her dream in the city, but she forgot that she wanted a family. She forgot that she wanted a home. She forgot that she wanted all these other things that were bigger than her career. So it was pretty life-changing.
Wow. When you say ego, what does that look like to you?
It's not the traditional way we use the term ego, where it's the loud, arrogant, person in the room. It's kind of a jerk. That's part of ego, but we're all capable of being a jerk. So the ego that I refer to is the unconscious brain. It's the unconscious behaviors, actions, thoughts, mindsets and beliefs, the things that we do 95% of the time because we're unconsciously going through the motions of life. That is not a bad thing. But the problem is, unless you stop and choose to want to learn about that ego is going to take over your life, and it's making your decisions in your business. It's making your decisions in your family. It's making your decisions on how you delegate and how you train and how you hire. It's making decisions on how you finance your business and how you buy your cars and everything. Not good or bad. They're just making the decisions. So, my ultimate goal is to teach people how to manage their ego so they can be more intentional. They can show up and lead with a consciousness that most of us are never blessed to have because we don't stop long enough to recognize what that even means.
Wow. So as far as ego, but I just want you to kind of explain and just kind of show us what this looked like in our personal life, in our business, as leaders. What does this look like? Just in case someone would say right now, I don't have an ego problem.
That's the number one thing I hear. I think that's the first red flag. When someone says, I don't have an ego, or I know someone else that does, or yeah, that guy's a real jerk, or that gal's a real jerk. That's all your ego. The ego is just the thing in us that blames, judges, accuses, gossips, pokes, prods other people. It's the thing that makes us have a reason of why we're not good enough and why someone else is holding us back, or why someone else isn't good enough and they're holding us back. Wow. And so it's recognizing which ego type are you. In the business that I run, there's three egos. There's the complier, the controller, and the protector. And we all have 1 to 2 dominant egos that show up in our world that we're more comfortable with. I'm a controller protector. So I'm intense and I'm fierce and I'm all this stuff. And I'm also sassy and fun and all that. But it's usually our overused strengths that we identify as our weaknesses. And unfortunately, our ego doesn't want us to own those. And so by recognizing our ego, learning about our good, bad, and ugly, now we can actually use our strength at its maximum instead of overusing it, which then usually sabotages our good intentions, sabotages our communication, our leadership, our partnerships, our families, all that fun stuff.
This is awesome. I'm listening to you. But this is good. I want you to dig a little bit into the aspect of the ego and how it shows up in business.
Yeah. So the ego shows up in business because we all as individuals show up in our businesses. But when we start looking at the ego, Again, the complier ego, how it shows in business, they are the people side of your business. So they're the ones that are warm, inviting, and friendly and caring. And they bring a lot of that human nurture culture to the business. Unfortunately, when that part is overused, they go along to get along. They don't speak their truth and share their wisdom because they don't think anybody cares or that they're going to be heard. They struggle to give feedback or to hold people accountable. They don't trust themselves enough to make really strong decisions. So they typically default to asking someone else, or they get a whole poll and then they make a decision, but then it's not, they're easy to sway a different way if they think they're going to upset someone. And so, the complier is a very important part of our business, and we need to make sure that they pull from the controller. The controller's strengths are, they're your go-getters. There's, results first, people second. They get to the finish line fast. And their ultimate goal is to win. And so they've got this freight train energy that's exciting and passionate and motivating. Unfortunately, that's typically getting them to the finish line without all their team members or the people with them. And so, teaching them to slow down and really let people get on the train and help everybody get to the finish line. Because ultimately in leadership in life, if we don't have people at the finish line with us, we lose. But that ego wants to tell you, just get there. It doesn't matter how fast, just do it. And so teaching them to slow down is a big part of the controller. Yeah. And then you got the protector. The protector is what grounds all of us. It's our values. It's our integrity. It's our courageous authenticity. And it is the part that makes us love and care deeply. Unfortunately, because of the intensity of that truth, values, love, it creates a lot of boundaries, walls, barriers, so that it doesn't get hurt. And so emotions are scary in the protector world. So we'd rather not feel anything than feel something, which ultimately makes us very extreme. So we can be the very hyper rational or the very illogical. And so recognizing, when do you go to that black and white brain that makes you maybe controversial or come across as difficult to collaborate with? My way or the highway. So very stubborn because we are stuck in our ways. Ultimate motivator there is to be right. And so we have to prove our point usually.
And I can just imagine how important it is to learn our egos. Learning our egos. Why should we learn our egos, and what will that do for us?
That's such a good question. It's a really simple answer. The simplest form is you get to live more intentionally and make sure your impact matches what you want it to be. If you were to ask any one of us, what impact did you make today? Either we'd be like, I'm not sure, or it's usually from our own perspective and it doesn't usually match the perspective of everybody else around us. And so being able to consciously say, this is the impact I want to create. And then knowing that if I didn't hit that, then I know how to change it. And that's really the value of this work, is saying, hey, I'm not going to be perfect. I will definitely screw up still. But knowing when to own that ugly side of us, know when to own when we make a mistake, so we can really inspire other people to step up, empower them to speak their truth, empower them to own their good, bad, and ugly, so that it's a team of innovation, of creativity, of collaboration, of productivity.
These egos that we're dealing with, because I the more you're talking, I'm listening, I'm like, wow, I can recognize it. Of course, we can recognize it in everybody else. We can recognize it in ourselves. I mean, I can be like, oh yeah, that's my wife.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's this person. I mean, it's so easy to point fingers at everybody else.
I think it goes back to our life experiences, and our ego changes with us. It's not a permanent state. It is how we see and view the world. Typically, the beliefs, mindsets have been set since childhood. I always say, if you've got children, you're going to start seeing the ego show up about age 2. And you start to see their personality, and you've got some that are a little more controlling and ambitious. And then you've got some that are a little shyer and quieter, and others that all they want to do is please you. They're going to do whatever it takes to make you like them. Those are all ego tactics. A lot of times those are designed from our experiences. So if we have a family that praises us for winning, or for every small thing we do, you're going to have a complier controller child. And then you've got your multiple siblings. So a lot of times our siblings will design our egos, where if we have competitive siblings, or one will typically be more of the controller, where the other one will be pushed more into the complier. And so it's always designed just based on our life circumstances. tragedies, change, anything that has pushed us into kind of a survival mode. That's where the ego comes into place. At one time, it protected us. It taught us, well, if I'm liked, then I'm okay. If I'm right, then I'm good. If I win and I'm the best, then I must be safe. And so, as we start to learn these motivators, you start to see how they've shown up in your life. They have gotten us to where we're at today. So this is where we don't want to make the ego bad. It's not bad. The ego's never going away. Again, it's your strength and your weakness. And so recognizing that it got you where you're at. I always call it the maverick years. Maverick's an I player. I must win. I must be right. I must be liked. When we turn into a we, become a leader, a manager, a boss, when we become a parent or a spouse, we have to be a we player. Now it doesn't matter if I win, because if my spouse isn't at the finish line or my team isn't at the finish line, I lose. And so shifting that I mentality to we is where we start to manage our ego. And some people do it by trial and error. And other people, need to really learn it. I would say the trial and error typically over manage their weakness ego, right? So if they're a controller, they might get to a point in their career where they've been micromanaging, they keep getting scolded about it, it's not working. So they now have turned into an over complier and they're not using it. So it's like finding the balance. The trick is to use all three. If we use all three, now we have the ambition, the drive to be better and strive for success. We have the integrity and the courage to speak our truth and to stand up and fight for what we believe and do what's right for everyone. And we have the ability to be able to empathize and care for people and make sure that they're okay too, not just the win. And that's really where great leadership is today, when we can balance it all and really just show up as our best self. It's not about trying to do it right or wrong. It's just being our best self and knowing we're holding our own integrity.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a load of knowledge. Bomb. Wow. That is so amazing. I'm really thinking, I'm listening. I'm like, wow. Lead to Greatness, listen to this. She talked about and mentioned how sometimes our life alters our ego. And this is what I love. I'm like, wow, I can see this like really just playing in my life and throughout my life from, when I was in elementary school, when I left my parents' home. And yes. You said something, I love it. It got you here, but it won't get you there. It got you here and it won't get you there. And I'm just like, man, our ego get us to a certain place, but I'm listening to you and I'm like, wow, it can get us here. But if we don't adjust our ego, it won't get us where we're going. Have you ever dealt with anyone, no name calling anything, have you ever dealt with anyone that maybe had that issue, their drive, their ego, it got them to where they are and they may be in a great place, but stopping them from getting to where they need to be the next level?
Oh, it happens to every single one of us. Just this morning, I was talking to some clients. I work with a lot of co-founders who are ambitious. They're building these amazing companies. And there's a point in their relationship, just like a marriage, and we can compare this to marriages all day, when we are on different pages, the ego wants to make us isolate and not be a team player. Because I have to take care of me first. We think everybody else is out to get us and the enemy, because when we were younger, that was kind of the thing we had to do. Where now that actually keeps the good people out too. And so we start to pick, blame, accuse when things don't go right in our life. And that starts to sabotage our success. So being able to communicate effectively, a controller communicates usually very eloquently. They always call them kind of a verbal ninja. They can put things very nicely on paper. They can really get their point across, but that's actually an ego tactic. It's not a bad thing. And it's a strength to be able to communicate effectively. And it's also an over communicating tactic that belittles other people. So we trigger egos that way. And so kind of knowing where's your ego, your controlling ego take over, and you're no longer speaking from your best self, you're speaking from a soapbox to prove a point. That's typically the cycle we go through. Or for the protector, how it overuses itself is it's a one-liner. My husband and I were doing a class last night, and we have to both side by side answer these questions. And I'm a controller and he's a protector. And so we said exactly the same thing in our answers, but his used 3 words and I used 3 sentences. And that's the epitome of how our egos talk differently. And so that's the number one sabotaging tactic of these egos, is if we're communicating through our own perspective, then we just lost and probably triggered 2 egos in the room. If we learn to communicate to all three egos, now we're not doing that miscommunication dance, and that creates unnecessary drama all day, every day.
Wow. Another knowledge bomb. You have to, Christie, you have to explain this to us. You just mentioned, because we're talking about communicating, and communicating is how leaders cast vision. It's how, if you're teaching, this is how you get everyone to understand. So I want, if you don't mind, I mean, just give us just a snippet of what it looks like to speak to all three egos in casting vision.
Yep. It's simpler than you think. So the controller is motivated by results. They want to get to the finish line fast. Tell them how they're going to win. Protectors, they're motivated by facts. How does everybody win? What's the facts that supports it? Give me the knowledge, the Excel sheet, anything that's going to support what you're saying we need to do. And how is it going to benefit the greater good in the community? The complier is, how's it going to affect the people? Why does this matter to me and to John and Sally down the hall? And that's really it. They just need to know why it matters in their perspective. So if you include that in the vision, this is how we're going to get there as a team and why it's really exciting and motivating. These are the facts that show that if we do X, Y, and Z, we'll get to, the end result by this date or by this timeline. And what's really great is by the time we get to the finish line, everybody's going to be communicating more effectively. We're going to have a great time together. It's going to be a lot more fun, and everybody gets to work as a team. Like, now you've piqued people's interest. I'm not saying this is utopia and you're not going to have anybody triggered or no one's going to have follow-up questions. You just didn't intentionally trigger an ego, so at least people are listening. They might have follow-up questions. They might even throw a little bit of a dig or a poke at you, but it's a different conversation because you at least got them interested in, they know why it matters to them at this moment. Does that make sense?
Christie, this is great. This is really great. And this is really going to be helpful to the Lead to Greatness community. So what I want to do, because we talked about the different kinds of egos, and we understand, we understand we need to learn about ego. We understand we need to understand the ego and understand the egos I have. What I want you to do now is, how does ego management impact our lives, our organizations, and our teams?
Yeah, ego management. This is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful gift you can give yourself. I always say, if you invest time to manage your ego, the beautiful thing is you learn to manage other people's egos, and it becomes this trickle-down effect where everybody's empowered to be their best self. Ego management, it's not easy all the time. Trust me, it's something that takes work, but it's not hard. It's just retraining our brain to think reactively instead of not just reacting. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so it's the process is slow down. We move so fast. The ego wants you to move fast. It wants you to think fast, talk fast. And the slower we can get, the easier it is for us to be present and be intentional. So choosing our next thought, action, and behavior is really all it takes. And then being given tools. I know that sounds very simple and a little utopian, but it really is that simple once you know what your ego looks like. The problem is self-awareness. That's really the gap that we usually have as humans. We aren't fully aware of our impact, of how we're showing up. We're not fully aware of what we do, let alone why do we do it. And if we don't know what we do, and then especially if we don't know why we do it, we can't change it. So self-awareness is the key to the first step of ego management.
Wow, another knowledge bomb. I want you to do this because this is so important, and this is all across the board, especially untrained. We naturally gravitate to this aspect of whatever's going on in our life that is somebody else's fault. And you're talking about ego, and I'm like, I can see how ego, it plays a role. Even the fact of thinking that somebody else's fault is an ego issue. I want you to speak to that individual that's right now, they may be dealing with something and they've been thinking that it was everybody else's fault and not their own.
The ego is powerful, and it really, truly can make us believe that everybody else is the reason for why the world is the way it is, why things are sucking, and why we can't move forward. The reality is we play our part. And my answer to that is, what part did you play? Whether it's 1% or 99%, what was your part? Self-awareness and ownership are the only way to empower yourself to get to a better place. No one else can give it to you. I always get asked, how do we reduce some of this divisiveness or inclusion and diversity? The reality is we can only put so many things in place to fix these problems before people have to know, truly know, authentically believe that they deserve that seat at the table. As many times as it's been invited, you have to trust that you deserve it. And then you have to be willing to show up once you sit there. And that's really, the only way to do that. You have to give yourself permission to own your part and to choose to change it.
Jeez. Knowledge bombs after knowledge bombs after knowledge bombs. I want to transition a little bit to your company. Let's talk about mindful choice. What inspired you to begin that journey and why?
It started out just kind of as a fun little thing, like what's the next business I want to do? Started doing my leadership training, and it was more kind of life coaching at the time. And then when I had my fall, so I was in medical sales before coaching, and I had this great career where I got to walk in and into hospitals, visit with patients, go into surgeries, all that fun stuff, educate surgeons. And it was a really eye-opening, purposeful job. I loved it, actually. I wasn't one of those people that left corporate America because I didn't like it. I just left it because I had an entrepreneur spirit and I needed to do more. And one of my favorite things to do with that job was when I was killing time, I would walk the halls and I was curious about, people who were in the hospital rooms. The thing that piqued my interest with the most were people who were there by themselves. I come from a very big family, and the thought of someone dying or being really ill in a hospital by themselves was just absolutely out of my comprehension at that time. And so I would go in and, learn a little bit about these people. Why are you here? Where's your family? And the most consistent thing I heard was I worked too much. And when I retired, my family wasn't there. Or just I didn't prioritize the right things when I was your age. And those were things that just stuck with me. And at the time, this was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so we're talking mostly men in baby boomer years. I looked at this in such a profound way after my fall, because it was like, holy moly, this isn't just going to be men in these hospital rooms. This is now women in these hospital rooms who have worked just as long, right? Nannies raising the kids. That is not a bad thing. I absolutely advocate for hardworking moms. Yeah. The thing that's going to make us all sad is when we're sitting in that hospital room because we didn't learn how to be successful at home and work. And that was the goal for Mindful Choice, is how do we stop these families from, divorcing after they've been together for 15, 20 years because their kids are grown now and they don't have to play survival anymore. How do we get people to really enjoy and understand what life balance means versus it just being this utopian word that people are like, that doesn't really make sense. No one has life balance. That's not true. People do have life balance. It's just a choice. And you have to manage that ego that tells you to work all the time because someone else is going to win, or you're going to fall behind, or you're not going to get the promotion, or going to disappoint someone if you don't stay until 7 p.m. at night every night. And so it's like mindfully choosing our next move. Like that's the real definition of mindful choices. How do you get to be mindful of your life and make the choice to show up intentionally? Wow. Bottom line, it's simple. Just takes consciousness.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. As a new client, what can someone expect from you and your team?
So we have a Mindful Choice Leadership Academy. There's no judgment here. We are an ego-managed environment, and what I love the most is our clients are learning about ego management. So everybody comes in this very neutral mindset. It's curious, it's mindful, it's tons of empathy, and then it's ambition and drive because we're pulling everybody's best self. We're managing when those I players show up and help people recognize that that's not getting them where they want to go. And so it's inspiring. It's simple. The academy is designed for the busy, successful person who doesn't have time. I've heard that over and over and over again. The ego wants to own your time and make sure no one has time to do this work. These are bite-sized pieces that only take 10 to 15 minutes a day for you to intentionally be better tomorrow. Our ultimate goal here at Mindful Choice is just to be 1% better today. If you can do 1% better every single day, you're 365% better at the end of the year, and you are in a better place. Your family will be grateful, your team will be grateful, your business will be grateful, and everybody will feel more successful, including yourself.
Before we go, what are some leadership growth tips, tools, advice that you can share with the Lead to Greatness community to help us reach our greatest potential?
Keep it simple. Become aware of your actions and take ownership for them. Good, bad, ugly. That's it. And what that means is you're going to have to face some of the ugliness that you do in the world. And it's not intentional and it doesn't make you a bad person. Just own it though. Once you own it, you can say sorry and you can move on from it. When we don't own it, there's nothing we can do. We just trigger more people. We isolate ourselves and we become unrelatable. So self-awareness, what was my impact? Is there something I could have changed to change the outcome of whatever situation you were in? Just those two simple questions will transform so much of how you show up every day, because you're intentionally asking yourself after every task, conversation, or situation, what was my impact? Is there something different I could have done to have changed the outcome? One of the quotes we use here at Mindful Choice is, you can't change other people, but you can change your own approach. And by changing your own approach, you can change how other people show up, which can change the outcome of a situation. And so that really is the power of ego management and self-awareness.
Christie Garcia, folks, this is so amazing. Thank you so much. If someone wants to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
You can go to my website, mindfulchoiceacademy.com. You can schedule a call there with me. You can sign up for the Leadership Academy right there. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out. I am on LinkedIn, Christie Garcia, or the Mindful Choice Leadership Academy are our links. Instagram, Facebook, we're all over the place. So reach out. I would love to connect with any of your audience. For the fact that they're listening to you, I know that they're already leveling up and doing some really great things. So thank you for what you do. I'm really impressed by the work you and your wife were doing. We were talking about the podcast you and your wife are working on as well. And I love it. The more work and love we can pass into the world, better off we all are.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, we want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I hope I add value to your listeners.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe to Lead to Greatness if this is your first time. And if this podcast was helpful to you, leave a big thumbs up. And also, I want you to check out our Marriage Coach podcast, the podcast with my wife and I. If you're on iTunes, please rate this podcast and leave a review and help get the word out. Again, thank you, Lead to Greatness Nation, for joining us on today. Looking forward to seeing you again on next week. Till then, remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace. We out.